This video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thanks for letting me do this for so long. You'll never guess which game I've been playing recently. Yeah, so Splatoon 3 is perhaps unsurprisingly not all that different to Splatoon 2, but the little additions made here and there as means of quality of life improvements do add up to make a big difference overall. Like the story mode takes clear inspiration from Octo Expansion to be even more arcade-like, and Salmon Run is as unforgiving as ever and I love it. But hey, I've also been playing Team Fortress 2 again. It's been several years since I pumped the majority of my near 2,000 hours into TF2, and in that time, some things have changed with this game. Certainly the world outside of TF2 has changed a lot, and given that Blizzard ruined Overwatch almost as badly as they ruined the lives of the people who worked for them, maybe it's time to reconnect with my old friend and see how things are doing. Well, Valve are doing their best impression of an absentee father and are kinda letting Team Fortress 2 forge its own path full of aimbots and hackers and weapons that still aren't even remotely balanced. It makes for a good point of comparison though, since I have talked about this topic before 9 years ago, so it'll be interesting to see which weapons are still terrible and which are actually kind of okay now. One per class, that's why it's a top 9, and yeah, crappy TF2 weapons. Given how often Valve update this game, I'll never have to make this video again. The age-old question, what makes a good demo man? Well, it's usually explosives, isn't it? Valve felt the need to give the Demo Man 2 incredibly powerful grenade launchers, making him the quintessential power class in competitive play, and so a lot of his weapons are judged by how they stack up against two of the strongest weapons in the game. You'd imagine that anything in the Demo Man's kit that doesn't go boom isn't worth equipping, but you only have to spend a few minutes sliding around as a Demo Knight to realize that there's a lot more to this class than just explosives. Besides, when you can cut heads off with your melee weapons, it does kind of give him a lot of kit that rushes that dopamine straight to your head. To that extent, I feel like I can't be too harsh on the Ullapul Caber, since while it's definitely been nerfed into the ground and is close to unrecognizable when compared to its sniper exploding heyday, having a one-time use explosive melee hit is still pretty satisfying. That's the thing, I don't think Demo Man has one truly unusable weapon. The Caber comes close since it does less damage now and can't one-shot light classes, and since it can't random crit either, you're trading a lot of damage potential for one powerful melee swing that doesn't even do all that much damage anymore. The idea is that you use it as a last resort option, or if a pesky scout gets up in your grill, which I suppose makes sense, but you can also get a little bit of traction if you throw a shield on and go around as a Caber Knight. Although even then, you're a bit hamstrung after one hit with your measly 55 damage until you get resupplied with a new grenade. Not the worst weapon in the world, but not as powerful as it once was, although, to be honest, being blown up by a demo using the Sticky Jumper Caber combo to launch himself across the map was never fun. So at least the world is a little more balanced now. Certain classes in TF2 are so stuck in one particular playstyle that any alternatives are never truly all that viable. The heavy weapons guy is blessed with the best single target damage output in the game thanks to his absurdly strong minigun, which pumps out so much damage at close range to melt every class in the game in a couple of seconds. Basically all of Heavy's primaries do a decent job of pumping out tons of damage, so we're looking at the other slots for crappy weapons. I want to stress that in all of my time playing TF2, and even the time when I wasn't, the eviction notice has basically never been a good weapon for Heavy. Honestly, the minigun is so good that everything else is just utility to make Heavy better at being healthy or in the right position to shoot some dudes, and from that perspective, at least the eviction notice has a little more going for it than it did before. I remember the scene being able to attack super fast but for terrible damage, which actually adds up to being less DPS than the stock fists, so already it's kind of terrible, but any and all efforts to balance it have only made things slightly worse. Nowadays it increases Heavy's movement speed by a little bit, but not quite as much as the gloves of running urgently, at the cost of draining health while you've got it out, which you'd think would move it towards being more of a utility item, but it's just a crappy version of the Gru that does a tiny amount of damage. It's got this speed boost on hit attribute, infantry, which kinda sounds good, but if you're using this thing for anything other than getting to the front lines quickly, then you need some serious introspection, especially since the speed boost and the increased speed in general makes Heavy fast enough to stumble over TF2's janky melee hit registration. I don't know, the eviction notice was bad before, but now it's terrible, and also it doesn't really matter, since Heavy is all about that minigun life, and a terrible melee weapon that you don't have to care about isn't gonna change that. Heavy has one love, and it sure ain't the brass knuckles. If you've ever played against a scout that knows what they're doing, you'll know that he can be a terrifying class to play against. The mobility is one thing, but pair that with a scattergun that can chunk down every class in the game with a few well-aimed meat shots, and you have a class with truly frightening offensive potential. And given that his speed lets him flank very easily, that's a lot of damage being pumped into your back without you noticing. This flanking playstyle was likely the source of inspiration behind the backscatter, a scattergun which is less accurate and has fewer shots before you have to reload, but gives you mini crits when you shoot someone from behind. It's the backstab gun where you can pretend you're a spy operating out of Boston and do insane amounts of damage to unsuspecting victims before disappearing into the shadows. Sounds really good, yeah? Well, no, not really. The backscatter falls apart less because it encourages a flanking playstyle, and more so because it forces you to flank for the weapon to be effective. If you are face to face with any opponent, you are doing significantly less damage than you would be if you had taken the normal scattergun with you. Given that not every map is easy for Scout to flank on, and really one well-placed sentry gun is enough to shut it down entirely, it makes the backscatter very situational at best and kinda useless at worst. The mini crits don't cross too many damage thresholds that you weren't capable of getting through anyway, and if you're attacking from behind with most weapons in the game, you can generally get at least 2 big shots off, and the backscatter just isn't advantageous enough to be worth taking for a spin. In a 1v1 against a scout with a scattergun who can hit his shots, you are toast with a side of bacon. I think I'd just rather be alive. Sniper has to be the most unique class in the game. Less so for what he can do, because there's plenty of other classes in TF2 who can inflict lots of damage very quickly, and hell, Spy can also one-shot everyone under the right circumstances, but it's actually the engagement range that sets the Sniper apart, because he's a long-range class in a game full of close-range mercenaries. No one can consistently challenge him from far away, so it's left to flankers to move around his line of sight and punish him at close range, his one major weakness. Spy is a wonderful counter because his most powerful tool, the backstab, only works at close range. So hey, why don't we give Sniper a weapon that does no damage, or really anything apart from protect him from one backstab? That sounds like really stupid, I think. I'm sorry, but you will never see any halfway decent sniper equip the Razorback. Dedicating one of your weapon slots to a passive item that only has a use against one of the 9 classes in the game is demonstrating to the world that you are terrified of spies and don't possess enough game sense to do anything about it other than sit there and hope for the best. There's this thing called opportunity cost, which in this case pretty much describes how choosing a weapon means that you're not choosing others, and when your other options are stuff like the Girati for insane utility or the SMG for good mid-range damage, or is other wearables for other useful passive benefits, having a wooden shield that only does one thing before regenerating on a cooldown is pretty pathetic by comparison. Not that the Razorback does shit to a spy that is aware enough to notice it and just fire off some revolver shots instead, a tactic made even more viable since what's the sniper gonna do at close range against that? I just don't get why you'd ever use it, and it's doubly annoying because a lot of new players get into the trap of thinking that it'll shut down spies completely and that they have no natural counter now, when in reality they couldn't be more wrong. Sometimes spies turn up out of nowhere to backstab you, and that's okay. It's the denial weapon. When I think about it, I hate the Razorback because I feel wrong equipping it, like I'm nerfing my class before I even leave the spawn room. Recording some of the footage you're watching wasn't all that fun because it meant that I had to equip some really shitty weapons in order to do so, and I want to say that the same applies with the Thompson 6000 for the Engineer. You might think that the Engineer is a little bit like Heavy in that you don't need many other options when your main gun can put out this much damage, but actually the Engineer will likely need a bit more firepower for threats that his sentry gun can't help him with, like those pesky spies. The Thompson 6000 is a dirty weapon that gets basically everything wrong about what a shotgun should be doing for the Engineer. While it occupies the same weapon slot as the shotgun, this thing is absolutely terrible at close range, and instead is intended to be more of a spam weapon to pester enemies at long range. With that in mind, can you justify why the Thompson is such a dick to spies and medics? Hitting these classes reduces a medic's uber by up to 10%, and a spy loses up to 20% of his cloak? And I don't know who thought this was a good idea, but it's not enough to save the Thompson. It's in this weird position where 90% of the time it's completely useless, and the equivalent of waving a white flag anytime any other class is even remotely close to you, but it's also horribly balanced, and you will get a surprising amount of undeserved mileage after spamming it down choke points and pissing off spies and medics. I want to say that it could be considered a utility item, but the shotgun is too important for Engineer to trade it out for something that is very rarely useful. If the Thompson was a laser pistol that acts as Engineer's secondary, it'd probably be a decent weapon. Anything to have less Wranglers in the world, I suppose. I thought long and hard about what Spy's worst weapon would be. Given how devastatingly strong backstabs are and how the core mechanic of the class is deceiving other human beings, you'd imagine that it'd be quite hard to fuck that up with an unlock, but you know what? Some of Spy's unlocks suck so hard. The Enforcer has been nerfed off of the face of the earth, and the Cloak and Dagger is a little like the Razorback, in which it gives new players this safety net that ends up teaching them the wrong lessons about a class. For a long time I wasn't sure which one I'd pick because they're both so bad, but then I remembered that Spy actually has 4 weapon slots, and man, the red tape recorder sure is something. Eons ago, when the red tape recorder first came out, I remember it being a little too good at what it was trying to do. Given that the standard sapper drains the health of enemy buildings, the red tape recorder instead reverses the building process so that a level 3 sentry, for example, slowly reverts to level 2, and then level 1, and then busted. The idea is that this is the sapper you go to if killing the engineer is too much trouble, since usually you just poke him in the back with a knife and then sap the shit out of all of his buildings, but you do the same with the red tape recorder and... wow, it's so slow. I think the point is that you're being annoying to engineers instead of devastating to building nests, and that if they're not babysitting their stuff then you can cause some big problems, but I've never been in a situation where I wanted a sentry de-leveled but not destroyed? It's like giving Spy a knife that debuffs someone on a backstab instead of killing them. No one would fucking use it ever! Just stick to the stock sapper and being actually useful for your team. Or, you know, the Wheatley one. Hello! When I first tackled this video topic many years ago, the one mistake I made was excluding stock weapons. In my mind, the stock weapons are so consistent as part of a class's base kit that you can't really have too many complaints. It speaks to the strength of TF2's design that even though you might want to whip out the soldier's direct hit because you're confident that you can hit targets, or the black box because your medic girlfriend isn't online right now, the stock rocket launcher is still really good at doing basically everything that a soldier will need to do. The one massive, glaring exception to this is of course Medic, who will eventually unlock the Crusader's crossbow for incredible long-range healing, decent damage at range, and even helps to charge Uber. Considering that you started with the stock syringe gun, it's a hell of an upgrade, because the syringe gun is poo-poo garbage. I'm torn though, because I can completely understand why, and I think the TF2 community knows why too. If you gave Medic a really strong primary weapon, no new player would do anything other than attack enemy gamers instead of, you know, doing the healing that their class is designed around, and so they try shooting people with a syringe gun, quickly realize that the damage is terrible and the projectiles are tiny and move so slowly through the air that you've got no hope in a 1v1 against anyone who knows what they're doing, and yeah, Medic isn't a combat class. Medic's other primaries have their own specific uses, and the Crusader's crossbow is borderline pay to win, it's so good, but the stock syringe gun has to be one of the worst damage dealing weapons in the entire game. Surely shooting syringes at someone in real life would hurt more than this. Let's be honest, TF2 has never been all that interested in realism, and few classes demonstrate this quite as well as the soldier. Apparently, his overt patriotism and general lack of intelligence is down to lead poisoning, which I suppose is fairly realistic, but you only have to look at rocket jumping to realise that, yeah, he's not the most realistic class around, is he? To that end, giving him laser weapons doesn't seem like such a bad idea. You can give him a rocket launcher that throws out laser beams and has this cool charge shot thing that sets people on fire for some reason. And he could have like this shotgun that has unlimited ammo and fires these puffs of energy that can go through more than one player. You know, a bit like the Pomps. Oh no. Yeah, generally, if you can compare any weapon to the Thompson, it's not looking good, but somehow the Righteous Bison ends up being even worse, if just down to that pesky opportunity cost again. Soldier has some outstandingly good secondaries that can give you hit scan options or an easier time rocket jumping, or some of the best team support in the whole game, or the world's crappiest ray gun. Much like the eviction notice, the Righteous Bison was never all that good, but it had a nice niche for a spell as a secondary with unlimited ammo that could do some nice work at long range, because rocket spam is good, but it's not all that consistent for damage. Recently though, and I say that, but recently means more than 5 years ago, the Bison was hit so hard by a nerf that made the actual energy particle a lot less effective. It counts as a fire projectile, and those were tweaked to be more consistent, but it meant that the Bison for some reason does a pathetic amount of damage now. Considering it's supposed to be a kind of shotgun, but all the pellets hit in one horizontal line through players, the damage is nowhere near good enough, and as a result, the Bison ends up being more of a meme weapon like the rocket jumper. Just something that you slap on to prove that you're not taking this game too seriously. I wish Valve took game balance seriously. In a similar vein to the Heavy, the design of the Pyro as a functional class in TF2 is a little too tunnel vision to lend itself to too many different playstyles. Air blasting can be great in 1v1s against projectile classes as well as a great defensive tool, and any shortcomings that Pyro has at range can be patched up with a shotgun or as an array of flare guns if you want to set people on fire from a distance. There's even a flank playstyle if you get good at detonator jumping. The options narrow significantly as soon as you see enemy gamers at close range though, because if you aren't running them down with your flamethrower, you're missing out on a lot of damage potential. Let's say you don't fancy doing that though, and instead you want to equip a secondary that douses enemies in fuel that takes 60 seconds or 750 damage to charge up, which is about 2.5 heavies worth of damage, and then when these enemies take any damage while doused, it'll set them on fire. Why would you do this? I say that both for the people with poor enough judgment to equip the gas passer, and also the people at Valve who decided that this was good game design. Pyro is a hard class to have unlocks for because they need to complement his primary role as a twisted fire starter that loves to spread that flame around. The gas passer requires a lot of charging up, and for an end result that can be achieved by spraying your flamethrower around for a few seconds, or, you know, Pyro has flare guns now, so you can just shoot some of those off into a crowd. The idea is to ambush people, I guess, but it treats setting enemies on fire like some unbelievable reward when it couldn't be more baked into the class you're playing. You can't even get the full benefit on your own since it requires enemies to take damage in order to be effective, and unless you plan on swinging your melee weapon around, the only other way you have of doing damage inflicts burning anyway! I had the sharpened volcano fragment on the previous list as Pyro's worst weapon, and it's the same idea as that. You can't raise lighting people on fire up as some huge advantage when it's literally the entire point of Pyro. All of this for a fart joke, Jesus Christ. So yeah, those are the worst weapons in Team Fortress 2. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Make sure you let me know in a comment down below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe for more in the future, and hit that bell for notifications of every new upload. If you need another video to watch right now, I ranked every Metal Gear game last week, and I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including Blue Catarade, Devon Hutt, and Sarah Mallion. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.